We had field trips where they would take us and buses, and we would go help some of the beach restoration site.
Oh,
But my father was a commercial fisherman.
okay.
And so I saw the effects on the fishing industry, and then also from the beach cleanup sites. There's oil slicks to this day that exist. And so that's partly why this work is so important to me.
This is Hourglass, the podcast for United Way of King County in Seattle. Coming up, a conversation with Lisa Fruichantie, the Executive Director of Na Ah Illhee Fund, a United Way-supported, Seattle-based organization that promotes the leadership of Indigenous women in communities from the Pacific Northwest to the Arctic to the Rockies. Fruichantie will discuss how her drive and her passion for her work stretches back to her childhood growing up in the area of Alaska that is still experiencing the effects of the 1989 Exxon Valdez Oil Spill, one of the most catastrophic environmental disasters in U.S. history. We will also hear about an upcoming United Way event and a local volunteer opportunity. I'm your host, Joe Burris. Thanks for tuning in. In 2024, Na Ah Illhee Fund celebrated the 20th anniversary of serving as a facilitator and resource partner to elevate Indigenous female-centered activism and leadership. But the seeds of the organization were sown much earlier. As stated on the Seattle-based organization's website, Na Ah Illhee says that it sees our land as a living, breathing entity, and it works in relationship with Mother Earth to strengthen her living systems through acts of support, reciprocity, and mutual respect. Na Ah Illhee Fund is led by people who come from many of the regions it serves. They've embodied and uplifted the organization's goals before the organization existed. And their passion and drive for advocacy and support of Mother Earth sometimes stretches back to moments when they've seen her exploited and abused, her living things destroyed virtually beyond recognition or repair. They are the clarion call for environmental justice and responsibility for the parts of the world that you don't hear much about until something goes terribly wrong. For Na Ah Illhee Fund Executive Director Lisa Fruichantie, the seeds of that call began while growing up in the area around Prince William Sound, Alaska. In March of 1989, an Exxon Valdez oil tanker ran aground at Prince William Sound, ruptured, and spilled 11 million gallons of oil. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration said the oil spill covered 1,300 miles of shoreline. According to an Alaska state government report, carcasses of more than 35,000 birds and 1,000 sea otters were found after the spill. But officials said that since most carcasses sink, the actual death toll of animals killed is likely much higher. Officials said that the best estimates are at least 250,000 seabirds, nearly 3,000 sea otters, 250 bald eagles, nearly 24 killer whales, and billions of salmon and herring eggs. For those who live in the region and make a living in the fishing industry, the oil spill changed their lives forever. And despite billions of dollars in cleanups and settlements, the area still has not returned to its state before the tanker spill. Some animal species, including killer whales, have yet to recover. Fruichantie says the seeds of activism were planted having seen firsthand the destruction of an area that once flourished and thrived before the catastrophic oil spill. She has served as managing director and program officer for the WIN Collective, a Denver-based social justice funder. Then she served as executive director of the Unchunwa Project, a Tacoma-based organization that promotes the revitalization of traditional Southeastern tattoos as a catalyst for healing among Southeast tribal nations. Last year, Fruichantie was named executive director of Na Ah Illhee Fund, whose programs include community funding, Indigenous leadership development, and an Indigenous-led land conservancy effort in the Pacific Northwest. Na Ah Illhee Fund is a member of United Way of King County's Indigenous Communities Fund, a group of Indigenous-led organizations that use United Way funding to address issues in their communities with the autonomy to disperse revenue where it's needed most. Hourglass recently sat down with Fruichantie about the work of Na Ah Illhee Fund and the Indigenous Communities Fund. But we began our discussion with a look back at her childhood. growing up in the Rockies and the Pacific Northwest, and the disaster that changed her life forever.
I like to always preface and say I was born in Ute hunting territory in southern Colorado.
Okay.
And then at a very young age, I was moved to Alaska, where I went from the desert, the Cortez Monument Valley area, and then went all the way to Alaska and lived in Dena'ina culture with the Kenaitze tribe in a small fishing village in Kisila. And we lived subsistently until Exxon Valdez. And then after that, that drastically shifted our way of life. That is where I grew up. We saw firsthand the effects on our waterway, on our cultural practices, on our way of life. And what part of that story that I didn't even come to recognize until I became older. You ask different stories when you get older and different questions when you get older. And at that point, I realized that it was only 9 months after Exxon that Mount Redoubt blew. And that is the second most deadliest or costliest volcanic eruption in United States history. So just 9 months later, when we were facing the effects of Exxon, there was record-breaking snow, and then we had ash on top of that. So now that you know that little bit about me and my background, and knowing that we had lived in direct relationship with the land, our community was poised and ready because of our way of life, but it was forever changed. And so many years later, because of that experience, my family thought it was a good idea for me to reconnect to my relatives. So my family, I'm Seminole and Muskogee. I'm a citizen of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma.
Oklahoma, okay.
Yeah, and that is where my grandparents were and the rest of my family throughout Oklahoma and the Four Corner region. And I would spend my winters in Alaska and my summers in the Four Corner states and in Oklahoma. So you can say I acclimate well. But with that, I learned a lot about especially small rural tribal communities.
Right.
And then it wasn't until I, as a young mother, moved to Washington State. Okay. And I've lived here now, and I've made my home for 25 years on the Puyallup land in Tacoma.
Okay. How did you get involved in this work?
The former director, Susan Balbus, had actually recruited me to the organization. So Susan had recruited me to the organization at the time when they needed someone to fill a programs director role. But because of my experience in stewarding community-based organization and working in philanthropy, led me to this opportunity. I have been working for the organization for about 6 months now, and this is an opportunity that allows me to connect continuously to my community, connection to the land, and then at the moment for our organization, I'm calling it Transition to Transformation.
Good. Now, you were there when those two disasters occurred?
I did.
How old were you?
I was 9. At that point, we had field trips where they would take us and buses, and we would go help some of the beach restoration site. Oh. But my father was a commercial fisherman.
Okay.
And so I saw the effects on the fishing industry, and then also from the beach cleanup sites. Mm-hmm. There's oil slicks to this day that exist. And so that's partly why this work is so important to me.
One of the things that I see as I travel the world really is this country is so instantaneous that we don't always remember something that happened 5 years ago. You can go someplace and see many remnants of destruction and disaster that forever remind you of it. And so when you say Exxon Valdez, someone from my generation automatically knows what you're talking about. I would tell people about Union Carbide, and they don't know what I'm talking about. For someone of a younger generation, what do you tell them about that?
I try to begin the story explaining what the environment was like before.
Okay.
Clean water. We had so many plants and animals, and we were able to eat our shellfish. All of that has changed now. And it was really, for me, the activist in me, I would say, was activated by that event, but not so much in the way that you think. It was really 7 years later when I was in high school that I started to see the daddy longleg return. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time I realized, prior to that, every summer you would see the daddy long. We don't have many insects in Alaska. Oh, okay. and you'd see the daddy longleg start to kind of just be everywhere. And I realized I started counting back, and it had been 7 years since I had seen that. And so for me, that was, I guess you can say, my awakening, and how long it takes for the environment to bounce back. That's right. And then also our responsibility.
Can you just give us a synopsis of the origins of Na Ah Illhee Fund?
So the fund was really born from a vision to center Indigenous women and communities in the environmental justice movement. It was originally founded in 2004 at a time when very few philanthropic organizations were Indigenous-led. And our name, Na Ah Illhee, comes from the Chinekwawa language, which means Mother Earth. And it began as really a giving circle and has really grown into a full-fledged Indigenous-led fund and movement builder. Our core mission is really to uplift other Native organizations, our relatives, and we do this through our funding, advocacy, capacity building. It's really designed to protect Indigenous economies, land and water, and sustain our cultural practices. Ultimately, we're here to support thriving Native communities rooted in their own lifeways. Our grantees include grassroots Native organizations, traditional knowledge holders, culture bearers, and intergenerational leaders.
And so can you just compare and contrast maybe what you would see in the Arctic as opposed to maybe the Puget Sound?
I would say what I've seen so far, being fairly new to the organization, is we see a lot of infrastructure, green infrastructure building. There's so many organizations that are focused on returning our trade routes, lifting up youth, providing opportunities, especially economic opportunities. In addition, in Puget Sound, we're seeing different initiatives, campaigns, fighting against future disasters. And we also really prioritize those who are left out, often our Two-Spirit, trans, women, and our elders.
Okay. And so now talk about some of your current projects.
Currently, we're being very responsive to our community in our Indigenous food sovereignty focus and Indigenous lifeways funding. So that supports our Native food producers, farmers, fishers, and gatherers. Mm-hmm. In addition to that focus and that responsiveness to the community, we also have a program called Eliptilicum, which is really about urban belonging, rematriation, and land to reservations, supporting the broader land back movement in our region. Mm-hmm. And then we're also focusing a lot right now on just indigenizing philanthropy. And so with that, our approach is shifting power and capital towards Native-led solutions. We are one of the most underfunded sectors. And Sovereign Futures is another aspect of that, engaging future Native leaders. So we have a Sovereign Futures cohort program, as well as our Trusted Messenger network. And with that, we are looking for to uplift those future Native leaders to traditional knowledge, leadership, and sustainable lifeways.
And when you talk about the funding and just how little Indigenous communities get, when you talk to funders, what do they tell you?
Good question. I haven't had a lot of experience in speaking to so many funders specifically to that. Mm-hmm. But is your question more around why don't they focus more on Native communities?
Why? Yeah. Why are they not giving more? Just period.
I think a lot of it has to do with relationship.
Okay.
So if they don't have a natural organic relationship, it's out of sight, out of mind.
Right.
And there's a lack of perception in what the needs are. Mm-hmm. Philanthropy, as we know it now, is based on very traditional mechanisms, and those often lead communities of color, but especially Indigenous communities, out of that picture.
Right. And what are some of the things that you're trying to do to sort of bridge that gap?
We're really messaging towards trust-based philanthropy, not just looking at multi-year, but even if we can push the envelope on the conversation of what does multi-generational funding look like.
And so when talking about the land acquisitions, where does that stand?
Our emphasis is to return. We have a saying that is return native lands to native hands, but it's also about returning native hands to native lands. So it's that reciprocal relationship.
And so what does that mean, returning native hands to native lands?
That looks like a lot of different things. So there's not a one size fits all, and that opportunity. It's very complicated in our history. We have a lot of checkerboarding that has occurred within our reservations. And right now we're seeing a shift where a new generation has inherited land that has, or perhaps they no longer want to be the stewards of land that's been in their family for generations. And they'd like to see it returned to the people who have stewarded that land since time immemorial. And so that's an opportunity to bridge those individuals with those tribes together. It can also look like urban opportunities where there is development and there is a ability to come and to guide and rematriate that land.
Last year, Na Ah Illhee Fund celebrated its 20th anniversary with a community gathering called Blue Jay Brings Back the Moon. The event honored what Na Ah Illhee called the brilliance and resilience of Indigenous communities across the Northwest.
And now we're really focusing our attention on our grantees, our community leaders, and everyone who's walked with us. Where I'm focusing on is our recommitment to building the next 20 years with even more intention, joy, and collective power.
Now, you are a member of the Seattle Urban Native Nonprofits, which United Way has funded through the Indigenous Communities Fund, and has recently grown and expanded as well. Talk about what it means to be a part of that coalition of Indigenous groups.
It's remarkable to stand together and to lock arm in arms at a time when our community needs to see that the most. It has been a true reward. And to be fully transparent with you, I'm also still learning.
And what events do you have going on this summer?
Well, one of our biggest events we actually just achieved, it was called Weaving Connections and our Heal Gathering. So through the state of Washington, based on the Healthy Environment for All Act, we had secured a significant amount of funding. And with that, we had hosted a gathering of our grantee community focused on sharing knowledge, celebration, and visioning together. And with that, we are now marking our next phase. We're going on the road. And we'll be in Eastern Washington to start with, because not only are we a grant maker, but we also strive to meet our community members literally where they are to better understand their work and collaborate. So you can imagine with our large funding region, it takes time to develop. Relationships are not fast. They take time to develop. And receiving an application is not the same as being in person and getting to see that work firsthand. So that's where we're excited to go on the road and to explore those relationships. And folks can also follow on our website. We are trying to be a bit more responsive with our social media and keep that more up to date. But we're really excited to share these stories with everyone.
Oh, great. And lastly, just listening to your story, and I think about everything that's going on now, and sometimes it really does seem so cyclical. What gives you hope?
What gives me hope is there's actually a good friend of mine who shared with me at one point that now is not a time to shrink back, but really to roll up our sleeves and to stand together and move forward. I have seen that so much behind closed doors. I've seen that so much at a time now where community is banding together, and specifically through food sovereignty and that movement, and saying we need to feed people and we need to return to our way of life, to supporting our community. That also is a key for our language and culture. So that gives me hope, is seeing that deep interconnectedness.
Lisa from Na Ah Illhee Fund, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
For more information about Na Ah Illhee Fund, log on to naaillhee.org. That's NAAHILLAHEE.org. Join us at the Wing Luke Museum in Seattle on June 12th for Conversations for Change, Building Generational Wealth. Conversations for Change is an ongoing United Way of King County series that allows us and our partners to delve into community issues impacting our county and offer ways on how you can help make a difference. The Building Generational Wealth event is a panel discussion about our new Bridging the Wealth Gap campaign. For more information, log on to uwkc.org/events. Do you love food and providing nourishment to local communities? The University District Food Bank is looking for volunteers to help serve food to members of its community. If you have just a few hours a week to give, you can make an impact on people's lives. University District Food Bank has volunteer opportunities Monday through Saturday, with some shifts during evening hours. For more information, log on to udistrictfoodbank.org. At United Way of King County, we are working side by side with communities to build an equitable future for everyone. Hourglass United Way is a podcast that highlights how we and our partners spend time making a difference in our communities. Our work is made possible by the generous donations from people like you. Please send comments and suggestions about our podcast to hourglassunitedway@gmail.com. To learn more about our work or to support United Way, log on to uwkc.org. I'm your host, Joe Burris. Thanks for listening. Until next time.